Welcome to the Fleet Geeks podcast. We're here to help develop fleet and transport professionals. Do you want to progress and develop your skills and knowledge? We promise to bring lively conversation and debate around interesting issues and keep you bang up to date with changes in our awesome industry. The Fleet Geeks are a community of professionals, and if you enjoy the podcast, why not join the discussion for free in the Fleet Geek community over on Facebook. How do you like my new clapperboard? I'm quite excited by that. Anyway, let me get rid of the props. Hello and welcome to this episode of Fleet Geeks podcast. I'm here and it's a Friday and I'm recording. And the reason I'm recording this podcast is I've just recorded a podcast called When to Quit, which went out earlier this week. And I had an interesting comment on it, which was around the podcast hadn't gone far enough in discussing the downstream impact of quitting and the challenge that may present for particularly people who are financially dependent and their families financially dependent on a certain role or position. So I thought I'd do a podcast on it because I thought that was a really interesting thing. And actually, that's absolutely right. So if you haven't listened to the previous podcast on when to quit, I suggest listening to that first before listening to this one, because I talk about making sure that we need to quit if compliance isn't being met, if there's a risk, those kinds of things. But one of the things I didn't talk about quite rightly, as the listener commented, was that I didn't really go into much detail about what that means for somebody, and the so what, right? So it's very easy to say quit an operator or quit something when it's not working, walk away from it. But what happens if your livelihood depends on that? And actually, I think this will probably resonate with a lot of listeners, because the thing is we rely on getting paid, for example. So, for example, if you are an external transport manager and you're allowed up to 4 operators, and that's your main bit of work, that's a real challenge balancing the commercials of needing to carry out that work, needing that business, and obviously the compliance and the risk of losing your reputation with the traffic commissioner based on non-compliance. So it has to, in that sense, you have to try and do everything in your power to try and enable an operator to be compliant, because potentially the impact for you and for others from a loss of income point of view can be really challenging. And I don't think I have a right or wrong answer for that. You know, I was reflecting on this and I was thinking, I don't think there is a right or wrong answer. And I think only you can know that when you're in that situation. Are you willing to risk it because of the impact that it may have? And I do wonder if that is the case, if it is going to really suffer financial hardship, if you prepare evidence of that. For example, if there's a potential question of reputation for you to consider. And it'd be interesting to hear if there's been any public inquiries. So those listeners who are solicitors, have there been any public inquiries where this has been a factor, where a transport manager has wanted to leave due to non-compliance but hasn't been able to because of the financial ramifications it could have on their personal life? And obviously, from a full-time point of view, if you're a full-time transport manager and you're desperate, you know, you're solely reliant on that income in that paid role, that is a real challenge, you know, particularly if you've got children and family and financial commitments like we all have. That's a real challenge for people. So I think one of the things I'm going to do is open this up to a bit of debate to those who are listening. At what point, you know, have you ever had that challenge around a non-compliant operator and being desperate to leave but not being able to from a financial point of view? Because best practice when it comes to moving roles, particularly when in a full-time capacity, is actually it's really bad practice often to leave a role, and you can find yourself struggling to get a new role, often because you're maybe not in a role and people think, well, what's happened there? Is there an issue? And if you leave an operation because they're non-compliant, what are your chances of getting a good reference or a response to a reference and those kinds of things? So that in itself presents a real challenge for transport managers. So I'm interested to hear, have people come across that, and what is the impact of that on people, so we can start the dialogue, because it's something that really isn't often spoken about.
Hello, it's Shani from Flagship Partners. We are really proud to sponsor the Fleet Geeks podcast. If you need expert advice or training for your fleet business, make Flagship Partners your first choice. We are really excited to announce the launch of our Transport Manager Academy. With expert development for fleet leaders, we offer fully accredited initial Transport Manager CPC training, CPC refresher, and operator license awareness training, as well as mentoring, support, and professional development beyond the qualification. Our vision is to develop elite fleet professionals.
I'm really interested to hear more from listeners around those challenges that they have, because realistically speaking, the facts are most transport managers are reliant on their income. Yeah. So pretty much all transport managers are going to be reliant on their income, and they're not going to have lots of assets. They're not going to have huge business interests or lots of investments that are paying them an income so they can just take it or leave it. So maybe I was a bit laissez-faire in my last podcast around just quitting, because in reality, it's important to quit because we need to safeguard our reputation. We need to make sure that we don't risk our reputation. But at the same time, that's a real challenge, isn't it, when it comes to making sure that we fulfill our obligations to our families and our other financial commitments. So certainly some food for thought. And at what point does that become, when is the tipping point for that? I don't know. It's easy for me to say to walk away from an operator because I've been in the flagship business so long that essentially, it may not, maybe a small external transport manager client, which represents a small amount of the income to my life, and therefore it may not be so much an issue. So I recognise that maybe I was a bit laissez-faire with that, and I think it's important balancing the moral obligation of compliance with the practicalities of everyday living, and I think that sensitivity would be given to that in a sort of compliance investigation. But nonetheless, I think that we've got to recognize those issues early. So maybe the podcast is really important because it enables people to think about where this is heading so that they can be one step ahead. When they realize that things aren't working out, don't leave it till the last minute, because actually you may come up with this challenge of my livelihood or my reputation. And that's really a complex dilemma for somebody to deal with. So if you feel like something's heading in that direction, what can you do to prevent it from happening in the first place, or prevent it from becoming an issue, which is more about not just when to quit, but to make sure you do a bit early. Maybe that's the caveat, is to make sure that you do it a bit early, that you recognize that you've really got your finger on the pulse of when things are going to go wrong. And often you can't be sure of that stuff, but it's important not to leave it too late either. So in this sense, I know it's a short podcast, but it was just something that I wanted people to think about, because it's an important thing to think about. And I don't have all the answers. The podcast isn't here to have all the answers, but certainly is here to create debate and to enable people to think about these things. So please do let me know. Drop us a line, drop us a message. When to quit? Not when to quit, but when is too much? When is it too much for you to risk your reputation against your livelihood? And when must you stay because of your livelihood? That is a pretty tricky question. So anyway, I hope you found it interesting, and please do listen to the next one. And I'll see you soon. Thank you. Bye-bye.
I hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you did, please share with your friends and colleagues too. Join us for free on Facebook with the Fleet Geeks community for transport and fleet managers. Fleet Geeks offers ongoing professional development, networking and mentoring too. So get in touch with me, Pete Rushmer, on any social media platform to find out more.